Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed a pleasure to join the debate today on Bill 175. I do want to give some context, though, to this piece of legislation, because I certainly, as a citizen and as a member of provincial parliament, feel strongly about components of it. And I just want to say, this is a normal piece of legislation, right? There is an act. In this case, this is Bill 181. This is Bill 175. It is massive, Mr. Speaker. It is the kind of legislation that really causes us, I think, as legislators, to call into question the motives of the government. And I mean that in a very serious way, because there are pieces and components of this legislation which obviously are in the public interest, and then there are others that have not been tested in this House. And that is a very important role that we have as legislators, is to look at all schedules contained within the legislation, to explore all of the unintended consequences of any piece of legislation and laws which will guide this province going forward. And so I really struggle with this. I mean, I think that the government's intentions are obviously to squeeze the Conservatives on certain parts and to put us in a corner on other parts. And that really is a most unfortunate state of affairs, because this piece of legislation will impact Ontarians for years to come, unless a future government has the ability to undo some of the damage. I would like to start off by saying that G175, the Safer Ontario Act, was a major topic of concern, as you would acknowledge, when the Police Association of Ontario came to visit us the week before last, or maybe last week. I don't know, they're all running together now at this stage in the game. And I do want to say, I mean, I was mentoring some Pathway students that day, and so those Pathway students from Kitchener-Waterloo sat in on the lobbying session with the Professional Association of Police Officers during that point in time. And it was incredibly interesting to have some young students in this educational program in Kitchener bear witness to the ask from the Police Association of Ontario. Their primary concern, as has been very well articulated, I think, by other legislators on this side of the House, primarily concerned is the privatization and the outsourcing out of the contracting out of police services in the province of Ontario. We share those concerns, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank Mark Eggers, John Forrester, Tim Reparan, and Mike Stotts, who took the time and who actually sat in my office, took open questions from the students about Bill 175, had conversations about carding, about what that process looks like, when it happens, why it happens. They had honest questions about around the opioid experience in the province of Ontario, the fentanyl, the response to the lack there of response for the government. These are students who obviously have had experiences with friends who've experienced overdosing, and I want to thank the police officers from Waterloo Region for embracing that experience, for talking extensively about their own experience, and honestly, as police officers who are on the street. I also want to say, I'm not sure what's going on over here, but there seems to be a little altercation, that until you have a personal experience with police forces as an individual, as a citizen in the province of Ontario, you actually don't know how important those people are who serve on the front line. My personal experience happened when I was 18 years old over here in Kensington Market. I was a student at Harvard Collegiate, just down the way, and I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I happened to be at an exact place where a store owner down in Kensington Market on Augusta Avenue decided that I was the enemy. And so he decided to drag me down Augusta Avenue by my hair and physically assaulted me. He had a mental breakdown, and the police that were called to called to the scene. I remember the name because his name was Officer Berger, and he took copious notes. He was very clear in his documentation of the assault. Of course, when you're in these instances, you don't really know what is going on. You're in shock. And he, though, was of great assistance to me because obviously sometimes these cases make it to court, and in that instance, his documentation validated the fact that I was the victim in that situation. And so I've actually never had the opportunity to thank Officer Berger of the Toronto Police Services. It was 30 years ago. It's a long time coming. But it leaves the question, because as this government really aggressively and with really like an open hostility, I feel, towards our police services, embrace this concept of renting out police services, of contracting out, of outsourcing certain police services, really all within this sort of facade of oversight, if you will, greater oversight. We know that to be the great myth of privatization. You don't improve accountability and oversight when you privatize. You actually lessen it. You water it down. And in speaking to police officers across the region of Waterloo, this act specifically addresses a number of areas that I have legitimate concerns, that our party has legitimate concerns in. So if you are going to outsource surveillance, for instance, the surveillance services, I hope everyone in this House would share in privacy concerns, potentially charter concerns, actually, Mr. Speaker. The outsourcing of reviewing crime scenes, of evaluating and documenting what happened in a criminal situation. Do you want someone who's just been hired to do that, or do you want someone who has an in-depth knowledge of the law and of policing doing that analysis? Motor vehicle analysis. So when accidents happen, this government has enabled through Bill 175 the outsourcing of analysis of motor vehicle accidents, really discounting the lived experience and the real experience of police officers who have specific skills set for that. Breath analysis. Now, this is really interesting, don't you think, Mr. Speaker? I mean, this government is enabling the ability for the outsourcing of analyzing breathalyzers in the province of Ontario. This, as we are on the cusp of reviewing and legalizing marijuana and cannabis. So, I mean, there really is no good rationale. In fact, the research that I have conducted and that I will be referencing in a moment does not support this direction at all. It is a poor use of legislative tools, it is a poor use of taxpayer money, and it will not serve the public. And so the question is, why would this government be going down this road? I mean, to appease municipalities who have funding pressures? I'm not sure. But I guarantee you, no municipality in the province of Ontario wants the ability to rent, security cops to do breathalyzer analysis, or to do motor vehicle analysis, or to look at crime scene evaluations. And certainly, it also begs the question, where is the money going to come from? Like, these are not services that are cheap, and if they are cheap, then you get what you're paid for. And if you get what you're paying for, then you actually are not serving the public good in any real sense. And so the question really remains, as this government touts like a 25-year review, I mean, 25 years to bring this comprehensive omnibus piece of legislation forward, where is the money going to be saved? And who is going to be hurt in the process? And I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that the citizens of this province will not be well served by the watering down of police services in the province of Ontario, nor will the level of accountability and public oversight be improved through this process. And I'll give you a quick example. Part of 175 pretends to sort of deal with the fact that when officers are suspended, they're suspended with pay. And this piece of legislation gives some latitude, if you will, to police chiefs, to make that decision. But essentially, it's just it is something that we refer to as a bit of a cloak, if you will. It does not really empower the CAO, the Chief of Police, to make this decision. And this is very personal for a lot of people because occasionally this does happen in police forces where there is a police officer who is suspended and then who takes advantage of the system, which the association has built in to protect the rights of those police officers for a due process to come into play. And this actually happened in Waterloo Region, where a former officer mocked police with an email thanking the service for paying him while he was suspended. So you can imagine, it just adds insult to injury that you have a police officer who has been removed from the workforce, who has totally broken ranks from the calling of police officers, who is really doing a level of disservice and disrespect to the calling of being a police officer, and then who has the gall and really the shame to mock them. And in this case, it was, and this is a matter of public record, it was Officer Markham who mocked what is supposed to be a fair and judicial system. And our police chief is very strong in this. And he's like, this does a huge disservice to the police officers who go to work every day and who put their lives on the line and who have a real deep sense of integrity as they go to work. So this piece of legislation pretends to deal with these officers, and it fails on that front. And what a missed opportunity it is in that. So to return, though, to this idea, and not this idea, but this piece of the legislation which really opens the door for the privatization of police services, I had a look at what other jurisdictions have done, and there is this one, there's a research study out of the United States. It's called Walking the Line on Police Privatization, Efficiency, Accountability, and Court Decisions. And the research reviews local police services by discussing economic and political pressures for police privatization and the concerns regarding the quality and the accountability of privatized police. And it does a cost efficiency analysis sought from police privatization, which outweighs a critical side effect of a growing confusion regarding police oversight and significant uncertainties in accountability. So this is exactly what I've just referenced in these few examples. I mean, who are these contracted out security people actually working for? Are they working for the company that is actually paying them, which obviously indirectly will be through the government? So there's a definite lack of accountability there. And you know, who are they ultimately responsible for? So in this, and also they actually went further in this research study, and they analyzed the court decisions in the U.S. dealing with the question of whether constitutional protections extend to private police conduct. Relevant court decisions suggest that the confusion may grow even worse, and local policymakers may need to pay more attention if they decide to privatize police services. So you have a lack of accountability, you have the potential violation of human rights and charter rights throughout this process. And while police privatization occurs in some jurisdictions in the states at all levels, the study first clarifies the motives behind police privatization, then brings to light the side effects that may occur, especially around accountability. And this should act as a guide for local policymakers, because accountability and cost efficiency are major concerns when considering police privatization. So to add insult to injury and to weaken the whole oversight perspective, people get very poor value for the money that is invested. The other section that I care deeply about on Bill 175, and which I actually have brought to the legislature floor, is the missing persons legislation, primarily because an amazing woman, amazing mother, Maureen Trask, came into my office 4 years ago, and her son Daniel Trask went missing in Temagami almost now 6 years ago. And as a mother who was grieving through the process, she realized that her ability and the police ability to really track down Daniel's last moves, his last placements, his last account, his last emails, was very limited because there was no criminal activity suggested, Mr. Speaker. And so not only was she frustrated in the fact that, her son had gone missing and that she was in this constant state of limbo around grieving for him, but the police, their hands were tied, if you will, on this, in that because no criminal activity was suggested, they could not do a thorough investigation. In fact, they could not even determine if a criminal activity actually had occurred. And so she really took, for this mother, her grief became advocacy, and so her grief became my advocacy as well. And actually, in 2015, I did bring a motion to the floor of this legislature, which was supported by all parties. And that motion asked very simply, it says that we ask the Attorney General's office to work with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to implement missing persons legislation that grants investigators the opportunity to apply for permissions to access information that will assist in determining the safety or the whereabouts of missing persons for whom criminal activity is not considered the cause. Essentially, this motion, which, and I need to be very clear, almost every province in Canada has missing persons legislation, and it has a profound effect for those people who suffer from dementia and who wander off and who go missing. It has a profound effect for those people in the Indigenous community who have seen thousands, hundreds of people disappear. And it gives this improved skills and tools to police officers to pursue missing persons. And so Bill 175 ironically pairs this untenable situation for us, which is the privatization of police services and the outsourcing of police services in a very unaccountable, irresponsible, inefficient, and fiscally irresponsible manner with a piece of legislation that I care deeply about. And so you can imagine, the dilemma that I am faced with as someone who's been fighting for 4 years to see a piece of legislation come into fore. And I already looked into the possibility of pulling this out because I strongly believe that it should be a standalone piece of legislation which we can monitor, which we can have some accountability with, which we can bring voices in as delegations to depute, to share their personal stories, so that we actually understand how important it is to have an effective piece of legislation to address missing persons. And it is important that this affects everyone in this room, Mr. Speaker. There are 330 ongoing missing person cases right now in the province of Ontario. About a dozen of those come from Waterloo Region, but last year over 6,700 people were reported missing in the province. And the legislation will hopefully bring needed clarity for police around what measures they can take to find these people. And this legislation would let courts issue warrants allowing police to track phone, banking, and travel records of missing people. This legislation already exists for a number of years now, Mr. Speaker, in 6 other provinces, in Alberta, in BC, in Manitoba, in Newfoundland, in Labrador, and Saskatchewan. And quite frankly, it should have happened in 2015. If this House agreed in 2015 through an NDP private member's motion that this was an important issue that affects every single person in this House, every single riding across the province, these are our sons, our daughters, our grandparents, our parents, why bury it in a controversial piece of legislation which runs counter to the very principles, quite honestly, that we should be coming to this place in, is that you do the best work for the people that elected you, you don't sell them out, you don't water it down, you bring forward a piece of legislation that actually will work. And this government chose not to do that. And so when I think of Daniel Robert Trask, who was 28 at the time, and he was on his journey into Mogami backcountry, he went missing November 3rd, 2011, and it took a Michigan backcountry SAR team to find him in 2015. And he was, they could never have found him because they didn't have the information to find him. He was an avid canoeist and a fisherman, and we should pull the missing persons legislation out.
Yep.